I would like to call the meeting, open the meeting of the Conservation and Forestry Committee for Tuesday, March 15, 2022 at 6 p.m. So I'd just like to thank Kelly for taking care of the recording tonight, as Mike, our secretary, is gone for the week. Thank you for your time. I printed out some copies of the minutes. I don't know if you guys had gone over that. Would you like me to pass them?
Yes.
Another couple over? Oh, one of those might actually have my scribblings on it. If that's the case, just don't worry about
Throw it
that.
back.
Some of the old business parts are pretty
Yeah.
dense,
Yeah.
but I didn't have any issue with how it read.
I make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I second it.
We have a vote. All in favor? Vote to accept as written. Thank you. For what I'm calling the chair report is going to overlap somewhat with some old business, but I wrote down that we were looking to try to review the comprehensive plan process within the town. And what I came up with some research was that generally when a comprehensive plan is written, it is partnered by the Southern Maine Regional Planning Committee within the county. And that's generally with some federal monies that have come down from above. And that document basically is trying to take a lot of information from townspeople, from committees within the town, to try to give the town information and tools and knowledge to know how to go about enacting different things, whether that be, in our case, trying to, manage and conserve open space, sustainable forestry, other different parts of the town, or different goals having to do with trying to maintain Acton's character can be had or charged in theory, in practice, I should say, to different committees based upon their purview. And that's essentially how the idea, was brought to pass. It gives an outline for the process to try to make these things happen and to try to, team build and make those things move forward. I didn't find anything and don't really have an idea myself or belief that a comprehensive plan necessarily, expires in that regard. For example, if someone, again, deems that Acton's character that we would like to promote is X, then that isn't necessarily something which just poof goes away in 5 years or 10 years necessarily. So these things don't tend to have, a 9-year and then on year 10 they are defunct or anything along those lines. These are broad-based goals and hopefully they carry forward over time. And then that's where, the different committees within the town hopefully put in their input, and then you move forward toward the goals of the comprehensive plan, is the way that I understand it. That's really the only thing I had for the comprehensive plan process itself. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that, if they know any different processes of ones that are in different towns. I did put that we can review some of the other Conservation and Forestry Committee practices and methods within the old business that's coming up here in just a second, so we can move right into that if we think that's a good time. But as far as with the town of Acton and the process of what we have for what it's used for, how it's brought about, what its lifespan is, if anybody has any feelings on that that are different, by all means, please let me know. Thoughts?
Don't really have too much input, really. I mean, the comprehensive plan is something that I would think keeps changing anyway, depending on people in town, and, you know, it's not
Well,
something in stone, it's just a guideline.
Right, in my mind, it's again, it's a set of goals and it evolves with
Right,
where a
right.
town is moving and as time goes by. It's not setting, like you said, policy per se,
Yeah.
but it's saying, here's where we are, because it does give a lot of the statistics that the Southern Maine Regional Planning brings about to create that plan.
Yeah.
And then again, it's a tool to say, if this is where we want to be, here are some ideas as to how we could get there. But again, specificity is definitely something that changes over time.
right.
Different goals, different pressures on a town, things like that. So again, just in moving into then the old business, I just wrote down to review the information gathered from other conservation and forestry committees from other towns. So I guess, Kelly, if you want to talk just quickly about that for our viewing public, I guess.
Well, you know, I was kind of hoping everybody would have a chance to read it, but, you know, I think Sanford has a very comprehensive plan, but I was sitting there thinking that Sanford versus Acton is two very different thought processes, right? So Sanford is the city, Sanford Springvale is the city, and then Acton is a small community of, you know, farming and touristry and forestry. So when I tried to look for North Berwick, thinking more like town, there wasn't a whole lot of, as you saw, it was very short and sweet.
And that was essentially on the town website for what the committee
Yeah.
meant to do, right?
What to do, yeah. I couldn't find any minutes or anything from any other meetings of that, but there possibly is, I just didn't have the time to delve into it.
Now, this may be vocabulary, but I want to make sure that we're understanding and I'm understanding. What I did see that you had for the Sanford one was technically called a conservation plan.
Correct.
And then I did see that in one of the sentences in there, it said that this is meant to be an appendix to the comprehensive plan.
Correct.
So I guess we could look at that as a subset for sure. So if we don't have, you know, more of the industry style things to be concerned about or whatnot, I don't know. Obviously, our comprehensive plan is still larger than what our conservation plan would be.
Right.
It's obviously nowhere near as grand and complex, for example, as Sanford's might be.
No.
In my mind, it wouldn't be.
No, and I know Andy was planning to bring some forth from some smaller towns.
Gotcha.
And see what he said, so, you know, that's just kinda, I went there first, because it seemed, well, let's see what a big city has for a comprehensive plan, and then let's look at Northborough, you know, smaller towns, see what they have, and I didn't see, and through my looking throughout multiple pages, I didn't see anything that was strategically different or strategically, or worded, you know, some were very short and sweet, others were bigger. So I think we have leeway to make it what we need to make it.
Gotcha. Underneath of the North Berwick short and sweet one, I saw that, again, talking about, for example, the different processes from different towns, I've made note of something that said that the management of the lands that were talked about within the North Berwick Conservation Committee, if I'm remembering this correctly, was something that was then going from the committee to the selectmen. So
Correct.
that was kind of their process. And I think that's what we have had here as well with past work on town properties. For example, whether it would be the older forestry plan, it was brought about as a goal from the Conservation Committee, Forestry Committee at the time, decided as policy by the selectmen, and if needed to go farther, would then go to the town meeting. But in that instance, it was something that was at the level of the selectmen, and then that was essentially where it was capped. Now, again, a lot of towns don't quite have the open forum of a town meeting like we do either. Or some larger ones like Sanford or Wells have got more managerial style town halls as well, so wouldn't expect that to be the same. Any other thoughts on that? I mean, you're thinking that
I
So the
looked up-
process is pretty similar?
I believe so.
Did you feel that the goals were quite similar as well? I mean, we're seeing a lot of similar, like, open space style stuff, productive farming I saw.
Yeah.
Productive farming, productive woodlands,
You know, agricultural, safety nets, I saw, you know, kind of the, trying to keep what we can for safe, you know, and I think we're doing the same here, instead of trying to, force development. So I think that's probably in every town in Southern Maine right now. What do we
Right.
protect for land and what do we use for?
or how, and/or how.
And
Yep,
or how,
Exactly,
yeah.
yep.
So if somebody's got a big farm and they wanna split it up, it's like, how do you say, would like to keep it open unless you buy it? That's pretty.
Well, and that's partly where some of the larger, longer winded plans get into that and talking about partnering with land trusts.
Yeah.
Whether it.
Maine Farmland Trust.
Main
or
farm, yeah, different
Great Works,
organizations as
yeah.
well. So that's where within the long version of our comprehensive plan, it talked about if this is your goal or if this is a tool, then these committees might be ones who would help to move that forward. So for example, in ours, when you got right down to page X, Y, and Z, it would say, you know, if one were to want to conserve land, go out and talk to other adjacent land trusts or something like that, and talk about conservation easements. Small woodland owners of Maine, anything along those lines. So there's plenty of those organizations, and again, I think our comp plan points to that, but obviously the how it's done and by whose hand, other than to say a conservation committee would be a good group of people to handle this and to start that little kernel of growth at the, you know, the seed. It seems to be that it goes again from the committee to the selectmen or
Selectmen.
whatever the board would be. And I didn't see anything above that that necessarily mentioned, you know, town meetings or anything. But then again, like I said, we are reasonably specific in that not too many towns do what we do that way. Right?
I'm not computer literate, so my wife does all the cruising on the computer, but she didn't find many towns that even had a forestry or conservation committee
Gotcha.
or, you know, commission. She did find in Freiburg, they've got like one paragraph is what tells what their mission is pretty much.
And that was put to the town, like the town's mission, not like the committee's, right,
Well-
exactly. Yep.
It says, "The mission of the Freiburg Conservation Committee is to restore, protect, and improve public access to Freiburg's publicly owned spaces by working with town departments, boards, committees, by enlisting volunteers through cooperation with landowners. The committee hopes to encourage those same goals on private property. They work to create opportunities for all citizens to learn about and enjoy our natural resources."
So that sounds really similar to the North Berwick.
Right.
Quick blurb on the
Quick
website.
blurb,
Yep.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, well, what I found, I'll give you, the couple of towns I talked with is a fellow by the name of John Bozak, who is part of the Three Rivers Land Trust and also on the Town of Lebanon Conservation Committee. And he spoke about some of their current projects as being essentially recreation and access type things, like there's a small pond down south of the town line on Fox's Ridge Road, and they're having, for example, an Eagle Scout is helping build access down to the pond across the public land. You know, small kiosks and nature information over on a property off of Gully Oven Road over that way, closer toward the Milton side of town. And also on the larger Hebo property, you know, more trails and kiosks and information there. So and the work that has been done on those town forest properties, the selectmen had hired a forester to do the work, and then that work was done there at that time. So I think his concept was that they had more of the conservation, and education side of things, and it didn't seem as though the work, other than overlapping, obviously, it wasn't as though the charge was from the Conservation Committee to generate the sustainable forestry scenario. That had been done in the past, at least in the past, at the level of the selectmen. Did not go any higher than that. And he did say that even for their other conservation projects, like those accesses and things like that, that they do not even go above the level of selectmen, or even to the level of the selectmen, if it's anything along those lines.
They don't take it to the town meeting to,
There is no, I don't, to be honest with you, think that Lebanon has a full town meeting like we do either. But again,
Fighting over other things.
right, I would be really surprised if they did, but having said that, that's, again, the concept is that the Conservation Committee's business is at ceiling or ceilinged or topped at the level of, if there was a project that was of scale enough, it would probably need requirement of signing off by the selectmen, but anything that was the day-to-day, month-to-month style Conservation Committee stuff just stayed at their level, and they decided what they were going to do, and then they just did it.
What was his name again? I'm sorry.
John Bozak, B-O-Z-A-K. He's over off of Center Road. So he's on their Conservation Committee, and the fellow from, Shapley was named David Mann, and has been on the committee from the 2007. So he's been on the committee quite a little while. They do have two different committees, probably similar to the way we had been with a forestry and a conservation committee. So what they're doing primarily are similar style stuff, like the trails through the town forest properties. The recreation style projects are part of the purview of the Conservation Committee. And the town themselves has hired a forester for all of the forestry work that's being done on the Shapley Town properties, which are 3 or 4, a couple of them, for example, out on Route 11, just up past the Blueberry Barrens. On the left-hand side towards Square Pond, there are a couple of pieces that have seen forestry work and harvesting out there. So, and the Town Forest Committee has a separate elected group of people and has the forester there, probably quite similar to the way that we're doing this, I would say. So the Forestry Committee, have the forester right there, and again, that does not go any higher than the level of the selectmen as far as any approval of any work that even the forester would do. So again, while I don't know whether they have, a higher level town meeting, raise your hand, vote yay or nay, like we do, their top end of what they have for Conservation Committee and forestry work is simply just decided upon and voted upon by the selectmen, and that's where that stops. But he said that they're quite fluid in what they choose to do, and they seem to be on their own recognizance, and he said that they didn't even have, these are just his words, you know, a comp plan that they were working off of. Just that they feel that this was their charge, this is what they're shooting for, and off they go. Talked with Carl Davis, the ex-chair of the committee here, and also still on, a member of the Three Rivers Land Trust, a little bit about where we are, and over multiple subjects of the committee as well as different conservation projects. And, you know, thoughts were that the comprehensive plan isn't something that necessarily just expires. Your goals don't change to that extent. Seemed to feel that, and again, this is my wording, was that an ordinance that would necessarily give our job description over and above what's in the comp plan is reasonably redundant in his mind. He did confirm, and this is from his memory, that the different conservation projects that we have done in town, we had an ordinance that monies from conservation projects that came from town lands, for example, the timber harvest on the Hebo-Hibo property in the day, had been earmarked for other conservation projects, and that since that is something which is quite specific and does not, maybe my vocabulary is going to be wrong, sunset, it's not something that has to be voted upon every year, that money can be used each year or for each project, that if something that specific is not, doesn't expire.
Okay.
then in fact, it would seem odd that, for example, a comprehensive plan would just be null and void, or, I think you guys are kind of understanding when I'm getting at this, that you're moving forward with, a thought process, and if something that we had voted upon that specifically at town meeting, if a forestry plan was voted to be created at the town meeting, if the position of a forester was voted to be created, if monies to be used for conservation projects coming off of town forest had been voted and is not expiring, then even though it's not necessarily straight up saying this is your job description, or, you know, thou shalt do this, or vote on this, or create an ordinance every given year, it seems that that is something which stays with us, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And of course, that we are not a governing body as far as that goes, and if we're not, you know, creating policy per se, then creating an ordinance, writing our job description again, seems a little, off, I guess.
Over the top.
And again, it's an evolving process. So, you know, if we refer back to a comprehensive plan, which refers to these things, then in my mind, it's a little redundant, but that's it. So, for example, one of the next things that I did bring about in the old business after this is, you know, we do have, we had a vote at the last meeting to draft an ordinance for this. So even if we aren't going to do something today toward that for reasons of a quorum, we can talk a little bit about this, but we should try to have an idea whether we are feeling that we are going to try to create something to solidify this. Otherwise, we do need to go back through procedure and nullify it or amend it, or however we would have to handle that, so. So those were my two towns, and that does segue into the ordinance drafting. Do we have thoughts on that from you guys?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think what you just said, I think we need, next meeting with quorum, we should talk about what we just did in the minutes and possibly just nullify that thought if we feel that it's gonna be redundant, and maybe make sure that everybody feels it's gonna be redundant.
Oh, by all means. Again, this isn't something that I'm trying to put out there as a policy, but we definitely, I think we can spend an awful lot of time creating our rules of engagement and a lot less time actually doing projects that can, you know, make a difference out there. So as long as we're not out in left field trying to create or do some things that would really, you know, be looked at sideways from the town, we have latitude from what I'm seeing of other towns around us, and we're pretty well right in the middle of the way we do our business, in my mind.
What's the difference between an ordinance and just guidelines, or, you know, a statement of what we think we need to do? Because I think that's what Andy was saying as well, you know. I don't know what we're even supposed to do.
Well, I guess I can't really answer that question because it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but, so I'd leave that to him to explain differently. But to me, again, something that says the Conservation Committee should come in front of the whole entire town, not only just the selectmen, with a statement and ordinance of who we are. For example, if you looked at what was written by the town of North Berwick, you could say that we have a creation of a committee and these are the goals of the committee, but I'm not thinking that at that point that was an ordinance per se. What is an ordinance? It's a regulation that says thou shalt do this, here's the process. It seems very process heavy to me when in fact it's not, without us being, if we had a level of rulemaking that we have, or a level of law that we create or something like that, that may be a different story. But if we're working on projects of access and conservation, I don't really see that as being, well, it just seems redundant to me, to the plan, to the comp plan. So I guess I can't really answer your question, Mark. I
I mean, it's
I
kind
don't
of,
feel that an ordinance is necessary, but I don't want to minimize the idea that if we think we should write our job description, to me, the job description is in the comp plan. I mean, again, if we were to go out in left field and say we are going to become a regulatory body and make comments about, you know, gravel pits or any of these things, and, well, then that might, you know, might have to step it up at that point, but I'm not saying that that's where we are, and I'm not saying that's who we
right.
are trying to be.
I mean, my question is, how much does the town people want us to be a larger voice in the comprehensive plan, or do they just trust us to go to the selectmen? You know, because when I.
Right, I'm gonna call that a rhetorical question, because
right?
you're right, again, if we find in the past, anything that we have done similar to, for example, the Goat Hill properties that have been conserved, any of that dictated, you know, spending of monies. It took, you know, grants to create that and to purchase that property, and obviously that rose to a level that was much greater than this committee can handle. Even if the genesis and that seed happened to be born here, with the help of the local land trust, we still had to, go back to the town and say, hey, that conservation money that we set aside, we're going to have to try to work a match with it. We're gonna have to try to team with people. You know, that's a much higher level of, formality than we have here. So as far as actual conservation projects of trail work or this or that, I mean, for example, if we were to say, we want to do trails or A, B, C, and D on one of the town forest properties, I don't think that that certainly rises to the level of bringing something so small to a town meeting. Again, if it somehow infringed upon policy, I suppose we could take it to the selectmen, but I certainly don't see anything to that level of going to a town meeting. Again, legally speaking, we do sometimes need to consult a lawyer for this or a lawyer for that, and in which case we're obviously going to the selectmen for it. So, C under the old business, I just have as the, site walks that we've spoken of to try to bring about, oh, I'm sorry, did I
Nope,
jump around?
nope.
Okay. You know, we're now coming into mud season, and a lot of the talk that we had had about walks on the town forest properties, you know, will be coming about here as spring comes along. So as the weather gets better, we'll start to schedule those things. I have a couple of other landowners, for example, Richard Nass down off of Milton Mills Road, who was a member of the Small Woodlot Owners of Maine, you know, volunteer to have a tour on his property that we've done work on as well. You know, that goes along with sections, and his property goes down to the Salmon Falls River and has quite a lot of frontage on the Salmon Falls River. There were projects that were cost shared from federal monies on his piece, and it's a really good example of sustainable work with partnerships to conserve, you know, to show the sustainable forestry as well as the conservation of all the other natural resources around associated with it.
Was any of his in the trust, land trust, or?
No,
Just,
he doesn't have his in there, yep. So again, any of these things, if we have anything specific, like, you know, that there are certain weekends we need to be thinking about, or sites or specificities within a piece of property, like, hey, we do want to go see, you know, where the cemetery was on the town farm property, or the old foundation section, or, see how ATV traffic has affected the Hebo-Hibo property. If we have anything specific like that that we want to be shooting for, you know, the next meeting would probably be a good time, now that we're coming into the season, to be able to get back into the woods a little more easily with snow off. And hopefully before bugs,
get to
but
see the ticks. They're probably out already.
They are, actually. I picked one off my cat today.
have you? I haven't had one on me
Came
yet
in.
this year. And I was just in Wells this morning, so I was kind of surprised. Other than that, that can just take us, do we have anything else that we need to add from, old business? Well, if we have any new business to tend to, new project ideas like we spoke of at the last meeting, any new, again, portions of a property that we feel are of concern, or pieces of land that may be coming up that the Conservation Committee should be having some input on, please feel free to shoot that out there. And by all means, if something pops up as a possibility, shoot an email to me and I'll make sure that it makes it to an agenda to talk about specifically.
What's the biggest thing with a town farm property is accessibility, is to
Yep.
get to it.
Right.
I don't know, I wouldn't think the town wants to spend a lot of money to make it so you could drive to it and, have a parking area or something, but.
Well, and in my, again, this is still part of, well, I don't know if that's new or old business, but yeah, that's a lot of what we've been talking about, Mark. I mean, for example, you guys were able to get to your piece back there to do the work, so obviously, being back there seasonally is feasible.
Right.
But to what extent are we talking about creating or improving access? I mean, in my mind, a lot of properties like those, really truly are seasonal. So it's not as though we, I don't feel as though we need as a town to be concerned about creating or improving or, encouraging certainly large motorized vehicles back out there. We don't need to have, the washout back into Sanborn Road like we had again.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
But again, that's really what the committee's for, is to talk things through specifically like that. So I guess in my mind, if these goals of access or trails or recreation on town properties are part of a comp plan, then we do need to have that as being an overarching style, goal and drive for us, and we just have to weigh them, on any given property at any given time. Like again, for example, what has happened on Hebo Road, do we need to see if would this have been something we would have done differently? Should we see that there has been the access or possible abuses? If that's our goal, then sometimes we have to just, take the good with the bad. But these are where these, again, seeds and kernels come about, and we need to then, bring it up to, again, it's not a level of policy, it's just a recommendation from the Conservation Committee. Right. So I didn't see anything seasonally within, to come back to your point of the town farm property, I didn't see anything that would prevent seasonal access back there.
I was getting to it.
It's getting to, well, yes, but having said that, the phrase I'm
Yeah.
putting in capital here is the seasonal part.
Yeah.
This is not every month out of the year, it's not in the middle of mud season.
Right.
Maybe it's just, the use as a snowmobile trail in the winter, and then people are walking in there on snowshoes, and that's that. It's in the back, but again, that's part of the idea of if our comp plan is shooting for this, then we just have to make those decisions. Not every piece of property is right out by the side of, well, in Chapley's case, this one would be on Route 11, with an opening right there.
Put the town farm in the wrong spot.
Well, that's the,
It was accessible.
well, as a non-New Englander, that's part of what I find is really great and interesting about the history of this area, is the major roads from back in the day aren't necessarily the major roads today.
Right.
You don't, you're out on an old woods road and you're seeing clusters of 5, 6, 7, 8 foundations. And people think that is just, today that's just wilderness back there. No, back in the day, that was the main road between point A and B, and there was a whole separate population of people back there.
Hence the saying, you can't get there from here.
Get there from here, yeah. I mean, we had Wes, on the committee before, and he spoke a lot about, he has still seen and has, knows the records of the town farm property being hayed. So of course, the town farm's history would have been as the poor farm in the day.
Right.
So you had a place to go, you had a place to work, and evidently, now that we've found the cemetery, you perhaps had a place to die too. Hopefully they're not correlated, but, But again, what is a major thoroughfare, you know, now might not have been then and vice versa, so it's really pretty neat to see things like that on an off-traveled way.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we have anything else under new business? Nothing coming up?
Nothing.
Okay. Well, before adjourning, I would like to say that we have our next, the next Monday coming up in April, where the meeting would occur, would be on the 11th at 6 o'clock, as confirmed by Jen. I'm still not quite sure I understand how we end up having some months where things are scheduled here, and she still has me call her up and text her and email her each month to confirm each and every individual meeting. Not quite sure how that works, but nevertheless, it's not a big deal, so I'll roll with it. Would like to think it would be more standardized and we would just have a slot, so that way we all know and don't show up on the wrong nights, but. So I will try to confirm that.
7 o'clock?
What's that?
Is it at 7 or 6?
6.
6?
Yep, we tried to move it from 7 to 6, and the concept at the time was to try to stick it on the second Monday.
Yeah.
So the 11th would be the second Monday, and then at the last meeting, we talked about trying to move it from 7 to 6. So I will confirm that with Jen here later on this week or beginning of next.
Okay, make a meeting to adjourn the meeting,
I second it.
All in favor?
1844.
There we go.
Look at that.